What's going on? It's another episode of Atlanta Basketball with Caleb Johnson. Look, we've got a lot to get into this episode because so much has happened since we've last talked. The preseason is over, the regular season is right around the corner, and that means things like contracts getting finalized and the roster getting finalized. It's all happened. It's all right in front of us. We're just a couple of days away from the regular season beginning. So, without any further ado, let's get right into it. First off, I want to make sure you follow me on social media at ATL Johnson 18. Go ahead and follow the radio station at 929 The Game. Do all of the liking, the subscribing, the commenting on YouTube if you want to, whatever, however you're consuming the podcast. Let us know your feedback and let me know how I can make this a better product for you guys. But the first thing I want to get into right off the bat is contracts that have happened and contracts that will not happen for one reason or another. I think the one that so many Hawks fans should be absolutely incredibly excited for is Dyson Daniels. This was a contract that, in order to get his rookie extension done, had to be done by Monday at 6 p.m. If they hadn't reached a deal, that meant restricted free agency was going to be around the corner for Dyson Daniels. And look, the Hawks never would have wanted to found themselves in that position, just simply for the fact that Dyson has shown how talented he truly is, what he adds to this team. Um, and I think the really simple part of this whole deal was that the longer you waited to get a deal done with Dyson Daniels, the more expensive it was going to become. Because I mean, if the Hawks truly, if they had done this, think a year ago before Dyson Daniels went on to have the most steals per game since I believe 1990, and just all of the impressive records that Dyson Daniels achieved over the course of last season on his way to becoming the runner up to defensive player of the year, and to, just pull off all of the accolades that Dyson Daniels achieved. If they had gotten a deal done before then, I'm sure it would have been, significantly cheaper than what they ultimately were able to reach. But I think the really, really big thing here for Hawks fans is to realize that Dyson Daniels is going to be a part of this team for quite some time, and he is on a what I believe to be a very fair deal, but also I think, pretty team friendly, if we're being quite honest. Like, this still counts as the offseason for the Atlanta Hawks. And so I think Onsi Saleh does it once again for the Hawks front office in getting a deal done with Dyson Daniels that is 4 years, $100 million. Now, you're looking at it and saying, okay, $25 million a year. It's not quite to that scale. And in fact, I believe Keith Smith, the Spotrac, kind of laid it out where the situation for the Hawks, I believe it begins for Dyson at like 22, then goes to 24, 25, and then ultimately 27. So kind of a sliding scale there for Dyson Daniels. And I think the way that they have set this deal up really gives the Hawks that optionality that Ansi loves to talk about, but then locks down a key core piece of this franchise. And Dyson Daniels is certainly a big part of that. And in fact, I had been asked multiple times to, in this offseason, of what I thought would the Hawks be able to get a deal done with Dyson because of everything going on with Trae Young. And I said, and I felt confident about this at the start of the summer, that the priority was going to be Dyson over Trae. Not that they necessarily value Dyson over Trae Young, but just simply because of his age and because of his defensive presence and because how unique his skill set is in the NBA. I thought their priority was going to be to make sure that this deal got done this offseason, that they didn't find themselves, trying to figure things out beyond this year and get in the messy situation of restricted free agency. It's crazy to think you've got a guy like Dyson Daniels locked in till 2030, essentially. You got Jalen Johnson locked into the same time frame. You've got Nikhil Alexander Walker locked in until 2029. Zachary Riza until 2028. I mean, there are key pieces of this team that are locked up for a significant amount of time, and that's what the Hawks need in this age of the salary cap and the way that the luxury tax thresholds and how they're placed, and all of the restrictions that come into play when it comes to putting together a basketball team on the floor. It's so good to know that your key pieces, your core young talent, are going to be a part of this roster for years to come. And getting that deal done with Dyson was a big part of it. Now, if you realize the deal being 4 years, $100 million, you might go, huh, well, that's interesting, because I feel like I've seen other guys the same age or the same class as Dyson Daniels getting 5-year deals. And you would be correct, because Christian Brown was a name that was kind of in the same stratosphere of what Dyson Daniels was looking at. And Christian Brown and the Denver Nuggets, they came to a deal that was 5 years and $125 million. So still getting that $25 million a year, but adding on an additional year. Keith Smith of Spotrac, who I'm so high on. Keith does incredible work. You should certainly follow him on social media and the podcast that he does for Front Office Sports and all of those sorts of things. Like, Keith's incredible. He reported earlier in the day on Monday that the Hawks were actually pretty far apart when it came to the Hawks were willing to do 5 years, but apparently it was more in the $115 million range, and that Dyson Daniels and his camp were looking to get a 5-year, $150 million type of deal, which is not that crazy, because that is the type of deal that the Orlando Magic gave Jalen Suggs just a year ago at 5 years, $150 million. So you're talking about $30 million a year, essentially. So the Falcons get a discount. I would, I don't feel right using that term, quite honestly, but they get a deal that is more team friendly than what some other teams have been able to do out there. And part of this is that when you have a young player, they obviously want some financial comfort of having a long-term deal done. And so, the team does have more leverage in these situations to get something to work. But in the same respect, when you're able to look around and say, hey, these are what other guys are getting, rightfully so stick up for what you think is your value. And clearly, in this instance, it was that Dyson's camp wanted at least, $25 million a year, and that's what they were able to secure. So kudos to Dyson Daniels. I'm sure he'll be someone that gets talked to on the Tuesday media session, and sure we'll get to talk about where he was and all of those sorts of things as he became a far more wealthy man than he had been at the past. Because I forget this is the one part of this whole thing where I believe Dyson, yeah, so Dyson goes from playing on a contract that he's making $7 million this year to next season he will be making $22 million. Quite the pay increase, and certainly, some life-changing money, much like when Jalen Johnson last year got his $30 million a year. That is truly life-changing money, and still a great value, quite honestly, when it comes to the Hawks' perspective of all of this. Now, Dyson Daniels' deal did get done, a deal that didn't happen before the league season technically begins, which I think all of these things had to be done by 6 p.m. on Monday, is an extension for Trae Young. And we had kind of known for a few weeks now that this wasn't going to happen, but it officially, became true that no extension is going to happen with Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks. I, of course, asked Trae Young at his media day availability about, is there any disappointment? And we talked about that on the podcast, and he was like, I'm good, bro. Like, I've got money. I've got my family. I'm happy. Essentially, he wasn't going to let the fact that clearly his camp and the Hawks were on two opposite ends of getting an extension done. I've spoken to you guys, and I've made it known through many different, podcasts and other things that I've done with other people that I really do think the De'Aaron Fox deal with the San Antonio Spurs, where they gave him a max deal, really kind of messed this whole thing up of Onsi Saleh and the Hawks getting any sort of deal done with Trae Young. It was just, and they were never going to give him a max deal. And I think Trae might have taken less money until you see De'Aaron Fox and you go, okay, well, I'm a better player than him. And Trae Young is. Trae Young is a better player than De'Aaron Fox. But sometimes, it's what your situation is, who you're playing for, timing, and certainly, your play and what the team is trying to build as to whether or not you get paid the big bucks or not. And in this case, Trae Young has a player option, I believe, for about $48 million next season that he could certainly pick up. Most likely will decline that, though, and enter restricted free agency. And it'll be interesting to see, kind of what happens. And I think the key thing to know about Trae Young and his future with the Hawks is this season is going to determine that. Make no mistake. The Hawks' success this year will determine whether or not Trae Young is an Atlanta Hawk in the future. If the Hawks run into injuries again this year, Trae Young, hopefully not a part of that. But if they run into injuries again, if they even if they don't run into injuries and they just aren't as successful of a team as people expect them to be, which is top four in the East. I have been one to say, hey, maybe we pump the brakes. Maybe we put them at 5-6 and just making the playoffs. But I think, make no mistake, if the Atlanta Hawks miss the playoffs and are in the play-in, even if they are in the play-in, if they miss the playoffs or have to go through the play-in in order to make the playoffs, and so, you're obviously fighting the 1 seed or the 2 seed and bounced in the first round, that'll be it for Trae Young's time in Atlanta. I think it's pretty clear cut. Now maybe they're able to reach some sort of a deal. Maybe both sides see the benefit of him sticking around in Atlanta, but it just really feels like both sides are looking towards the success of this season to determine Trae Young's future in Atlanta. But as Trae said at media day, as he has said multiple times, as Quinn Snyder has spoken about, this team is going to approach this season one step at a time, one day at a time. Try not to look too far ahead as to the end of the season, as to the trade deadline, all of those sorts of things of what moves could potentially happen. They're going to try to win games as soon as Wednesday night when they take on the Toronto Raptors in the opening night of the season for the Hawks. And man, I can't wait for it because at this point we're just doing so much. It feels like filibustering almost of just so much conversation about what can be, what can happen. But I do think one important thing to get into next is who is going to be suiting up for the Atlanta Hawks in this 2025-2026 NBA season. No real big surprises, I think, for this roster, but just some maybe pleasant surprises or kind of smart decisions that I think have been made to round out this Atlanta Hawks roster. And we'll start with a guy who I think is so incredibly deserving of his opportunity of going from being a two-way player in the NBA to, for the first time, at I believe he's 26 years old, Keaton Wallace is on a full-time contract with the Atlanta Hawks as the Hawks decided to convert Keaton's two-way contract into a full roster spot to give the Hawks 14 players currently on their roster. They've still got one spot available, but it's just it's so cool, I think, with what the Hawks have been able to do in order to put this roster together and include Keaton Wallace as a part of that. Keaton is if you haven't heard from him, just one of the most humble guys, who I think he is very self-aware of his skill set and what it takes to fight to make it in the NBA. And he certainly, had quite a battle in order to get this opportunity, because he didn't have the high praise like his younger brother, Cason Wallace, who came out and goes to the Thunder, ends up winning a championship, and so Keaton is gotten to watch his younger brother have that success, and instead on his end, went undrafted out of college and went the G League route, and had the opportunity with the Clippers, and ultimately ends up with the Hawks, and ends up, playing in College Park with the Skyhawks, getting the opportunity because of injuries last season to play to his limit of 50 games in the NBA, and now takes that next step. And I know this is, something that certainly excites a guy like Quinn Snyder, to see development play out when it comes to the roster. And a guy like Keaton Wallace getting this opportunity, of course, it was so cool to hear from Keaton on Monday when he talked about, crediting Ash Smith, who is his player development coach and someone who has been kind of with him every step of the way with the Atlanta Hawks and his time with the College Park Skyhawks. And then I think one of my favorites was Keaton saying, I have earned the trust from my teammates that I'm no longer, clapping and, hey, give me the ball, let me get the ball kind of thing. That he has that trust from his teammates in order to run the offense, and, as he said, kind of be that quarterback on the floor in that backup point guard position. Now, of course, it's been discussed by a lot of different people how I don't think this is a situation necessarily where Trae Young comes out of the game and in comes Keaton Wallace, because the way that the Hawks are going to be set up this year is not necessarily super dependent on a backup point guard per se. They're going to mix and match, and Quinn hates putting those labels of 1 through 5 on guys, and knows how a lot of them are fluid. But certainly, Keaton is that option for getting playing time in certain game situations. And then the other element too is you need to give Trae some rest for a night, or hopefully not, but you deal with an injury to Trae or to Luke Kennard, or Nickeil Alexander-Walker or anything like that, Dyson Daniels, and you potentially would see, Keaton Wallace get some more opportunity and run with the Hawks this season. I think it's crucial, the development that he's had coming up to this point, and the simple fact that he did get that opportunity last season because injuries hit this team, to play a lot more than he normally would have. And that has certainly benefited him to get to this point. Uh, I want to go through the roster because rosters have been finalized in the NBA, and the Hawks are right now going to send out a roster that has, let's see, 6 guards, 5 forwards, and 3 centers. So, um, obviously, kind of seeing them more on the guard heavy position, and 3 two-way players that they're able to have because of the way that they worked out their uh, you know full-time contracts versus their two-way players. I'll go through this kind of from the guard position. No real surprises with any of these guys, as you've got Trae Young, Dyson Daniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Luke Kennard, Nikola Jurisic, and Keaton Wallace. Of course, if you remember, Nikola Jurisic was on the two-way deal last year. He got that at the end of the season, and then started this year with the full contract. And so this is technically Nikola Jurisic rookie season because he didn't get to play any last year. He dealt with the different injuries last season that kind of slowed down his progress, but a lot of excitement I certainly think is there for Nico, who won't get as much playing time this season just simply because you've got a lot of veterans in that guard role, and guys like Keaton Wallace, who, even if they are new to getting an NBA contract, have the experience out there that Nico just quite honestly, to this point, doesn't have yet. Doesn't mean that he won't have in the future and be able to contribute to this team in the future. As far as forwards, also another one where no real surprises: Jalen Johnson, Mo Gay, Zachary Rizachet, Asen Newell, and Vit Krejci. I think you could probably obviously put Krejci in the guards role as well, as he kind of bounces in between the two. But for the kind of putting the roster together, I guess he is in that forward spot, and was someone that I had wondered about, quite honestly, what his future would be with this team, because Veet did not have the best camp, at least what played out on the floor in front of all of us media that could cover the team. Because, NBA media, we don't get the opportunity to see any parts of training camp except for the shoot arounds that happen at the end of practice. And so what we could watch is game film. And from my perspective, I just felt like Veet didn't have the confidence that we've seen him have the last couple of years. And I just don't think his shooting skills were necessarily shown very strong, and a lot of turnovers. So it's just a lot of different things that certainly made me a bit uncomfortable with V, especially because I knew his contract wasn't guaranteed. But ultimately, he ends up making the roster. Of course, centers. You've got Kristaps Porzingis, Onyeka Okongwu, and N'Faly Dante. Dante, of course, being the guy who was a two-way player with the Rockets. The Hawks signed him to a full-time offer sheet. It's the first time that a two-way player was signed to a full contract offer sheet, because they knew that the Rockets weren't going to be able to match it because of their salary cap situation. And so he ends up coming over to Atlanta, fighting out with a Exhibit 10 contract in Charles Bassey. And I think Charles Bassey did a lot of really impressive things that I hope he sticks around this organization and ends up getting to play with the College Park Skyhawks, because I think there's a lot of upside, and especially the rebounding ability of Charles Bassey, and the blocks that he was able to show through the playing time that he got through the preseason. But ultimately, when you've signed a guy like Dante, you've committed some money to him, and you see the development there. You're going to go with that guy over the Exhibit 10. When it comes to 2A, speaking of Exhibit 10 deals, a guy like Caleb Houston gets signed as a two-way player. He is someone drafted by the Magic. He was I believe, the 32nd overall pick in 2022. He joins the Hawks, after I think he played about 58 games, 6 starts for the Orlando Magic this past season. Just only averaged 4 points a game, and about 13 and a half minutes that he played per game. And so, once again, another development piece for this team. I think if the Hawks find themselves in a position where they really need some 3-point shooting, and the guys that they have out there aren't hitting shots, you need to inject some offense in this team, and you want to turn to a two-way player. Caleb Houston is that guy, because he has shown over the course of his time with the Magic that knocking down threes is a big part of what he does. But I think still a lot to be wanted on the defensive end of the floor and his game, and then just outside of being that spot up shooter, something that Houston hasn't necessarily shown enough of. But there's still there is enough promise there to get the two-way contract, and so we'll see how things play out with him. Ellie Njai is a guy that has been brought in that I think there is a lot of excitement for, what he can potentially bring to this roster. And then Jacob Toppin, I think someone who I talked about this on the last podcast. Coming into the season, I really didn't. I guess when I say I didn't think very highly of Jacob Toppin, like he just seemed like another developmental piece. But through the preseason, man, I feel like Jacob Toppin has shown that he, much like Keaton Wallace, has that veteran presence of he understands how the game is played. He understands how to be unselfish when he needs to be unselfish. He understands when to, take the ball and try to get a bucket when that is what is needed as roles change out on the floor. And so I think having that veteran presence, and I use that term very loosely, veteran presence for a young NBA player, to have that on a two-way deal is a really, really, really solid deal and great value for the Hawks roster to have. And someone that, honestly, as I mentioned, some of those forwards that the Hawks have right now, if you were to tell me that an injury happened to Jalen Johnson, and I certainly don't want to see that happen, but nicks and bruises do happen. And in fact, Quinn Snyder's already spoken about the fact that some nicks and bruises have happened through the preseason, and you didn't see Dyson Daniels or Jalen Johnson play in that final preseason game. And we're to assume because of those things that they just want to be on the careful, just extra careful with exercise that extra level of caution for this team. And so because of that, an injury could happen. And so would this team be more likely to turn to an Asa Newell, your rookie out of Georgia, or do they go to a Jacob Toppin, guy who is on a two-way but has NBA experience? And I think that is where you would see Jacob Toppin get some potential opportunity with the Hawks. So certainly, don't count him out, but would be great if you don't end up needing him really outside of some mop-up duty minutes, because ideally you're going to stay on the healthy side for a successful campaign this season. Some other news and kind of little notes, things that I wanted to fit in this podcast. I had been asked about on another podcast that I did, and go check out the Waterboys show. It was a lot of fun getting to do that with those guys, as they're on YouTube and TikTok and Twitter and Instagram, everywhere. They're a bunch of certainly interesting guys of Trey and Behan. It was fun getting to join them this past week. They asked me, though, about a former Hawk who is now available once again, and that is Kobe Buffkin, as Kobe Buffkin was cut by by the Brooklyn Nets in order for them to make their final roster decisions. I always thought it was going to be an uphill battle for Kobe Buffkin to make the Brooklyn Nets roster, because you talk about the number of guards that the Hawks have. I mean, the Brooklyn Nets uh, drafted, it felt like 8 guards this past NBA draft. And so there's a lot of options for the Brooklyn Nets, and for Buffkin to try to make this roster, it was going to be an uphill battle. And ultimately, they gave up, my understanding is like $110,000 in order to make the deal. And so because of all of these reasons, you end up in a situation where Kobe just isn't going to make the roster, but he also can't go back and play for the Atlanta Hawks. This is one of those kind of weird, tricky situations where because he was traded by the Hawks, I believe it is for the entire season. And I was trying to remember, I meant to have this pulled up before I got ready to record this podcast, but I do know that Keith Smith of Spotrac made sure to kind of like clear all these things up, is that because the Hawks traded him away, they're not able to go and pick him back up. And I honestly, if we're being just point blank, I don't know that there was ever going to be a situation where the Hawks were like, "All right, Kobe, come on back. We'll put you on the roster," just because they moved on. They moved on. He knows they're not a part. He knows he's not a part of the future, and so I think his best bet would be trying to latch on with maybe another team that wants to put a flyer on him joining their squad or going the G League route, or maybe he ends up playing overseas. But I do think the injuries for Kobe Buffkin just became too big of a problem, that teams like the Hawks are just, hey, it's best if we move on. Onsi obviously spoke in the offseason about the fact that he didn't know if Kobe was going to have much of an opportunity to play because of how the roster is constructed. And so for all of those reasons, it's tough for a young guard who I think came into the NBA with a lot of promise, of what he could potentially bring as that backup point guard, or two guard to play in place of Trey or alongside a bench unit. But it ultimately didn't work out with the Hawks, doesn't work out with the with the Nets, and just hoping the best for Kobe, that he's able to land somewhere, and just turn his career around, because it's been off to a rough start because of all these injuries that he's experienced. And yeah, just you never enjoy seeing that sort of thing happen to what I think is a character-wise a great guy, but just someone who the injuries have become too much for him. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Atlanta Basketball with Caleb Johnson. We're, like I said, just a couple of days away from the NBA season. I'll be back to talk to you guys very soon, once we get, a game or two underway, and have some things that we can actually sink our teeth in and say, hey, this is how the Hawks are going to play to start the season. This is, the positive. These are the negatives. All of those sorts of things we're going to be able to get into in future episodes. And I honestly, I can't wait for it. I'm so ready to watch NBA basketball that actually counts. So make sure you give me a follow on social media at ATL Johnson 18. Give the radio station a follow at 929 The Game. Subscribe to the podcast, Atlanta Basketball with Caleb Johnson. Rate it, give it 5 stars, subscribe, all of those different things. Do all of the things that make my boss very, very, very happy, and that continue to give you new products. And like I said, if you want to hit me up on social media and tell me what you would like to see more of in these podcast episodes, feel free to do so, because I'll be constantly working on trying to make this thing better. But until next time, guys, y'all have a good one.